Hello everyone, and welcome back to our Global Business Issues video lecture series. In Lesson 1, we introduced the meaning of global business and why companies today must understand trade, culture, technology, supply chains, and international markets. In today's lesson, we will focus on one of the most important forces shaping global business, the economy. Imagine that a company wants to sell electric cars, smartphones, coffee, or clothing in another country. Before entering that market, the company must ask important questions. Is the economy growing? Are prices rising? Is the currency stable? Are interest rates high or low? Is the country part of a regional trade bloc? These questions are not just for economists. They are also important for business managers, investors, exporters, and entrepreneurs. Global business does not happen in a vacuum. It happens inside economic environments. When an economy is strong, consumers may have more income, businesses may invest more, and demand for goods and services may increase. When an economy is weak, consumers may reduce spending, companies may delay investment, and international trade may slow down. This is why global companies carefully study economic conditions before making decisions. A company may have a great product, but if the market has high inflation, unstable currency, or weak consumer demand, success becomes more difficult. Understanding economic factors helps companies reduce risk and make better strategic decisions. In this lesson, we will study 4 major areas. First, we will look at macroeconomic indicators and how they affect global markets. Second, we will discuss exchange rates and currency risk. Third, we will examine inflation, interest rates, and economic growth. Finally, we will explore economic integration and regional blocks. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain how economic conditions influence international business decisions, such as pricing, investment, market entry, sourcing, and expansion. Let's begin with macroeconomic indicators. The word macro means large or overall. Macroeconomic indicators are measurements that show the overall condition of an economy. They help businesses understand whether a country's economy is healthy, growing, unstable, or slowing down. Common macroeconomic indicators include GDP growth, inflation, unemployment, interest rates, exchange rates, trade balance, and consumer confidence. For global businesses, these indicators are like a dashboard. Just as a driver checks the speed, fuel, and warning lights before driving, a company checks economic indicators before entering or expanding in a market. One of the most important indicators is GDP growth. GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. It measures the total value of goods and services produced in a country over a period of time. When GDP is growing, it usually means that economic activity is increasing. Businesses may see more demand, higher sales, and better opportunities for investment. For example, if a country has strong GDP growth, a foreign company may see it as an attractive market for expansion. But if GDP growth is very low or negative, businesses may be more careful because consumers and companies may spend less. GDP growth helps global businesses answer a basic question: is this market expanding or slowing down? Another important indicator is unemployment. The unemployment rate shows the percentage of people who are looking for work but do not have jobs. When unemployment is high, many consumers may have less income to spend. This can reduce demand for products such as cars, electronics, clothing, travel, and restaurant services. When unemployment is low, more people are working, income may be stronger and consumer spending may increase. For global companies, this matters because employment conditions affect market demand. A company entering a new country must ask, do consumers have enough income to buy our product? Are workers available for our business operations? Inflation means a general increase in prices over time. When inflation is moderate and stable, businesses can usually plan more easily, but when inflation rises too quickly, it can create serious problems. Consumers may lose purchasing power because their money buys less than before. Businesses may face higher costs for materials, wages, transportation, and energy. For example, if the cost of fuel and raw materials increases, a company may need to raise its prices. But if prices rise too much, customers may buy less. Inflation affects both consumers and companies, making it one of the most important economic factors in global markets. Interest rates are another key economic factor. An interest rate is the cost of borrowing money. When interest rates are low, it is usually cheaper for companies to borrow money to build factories, open stores, buy equipment, or invest in new projects. Consumers may also borrow more for cars, homes, or other purchases. But when interest rates are high, borrowing becomes more expensive. Companies may delay expansion and consumers may reduce spending. For global businesses, interest rates affect investment decisions, financing costs, consumer demand, and even currency values. A company planning to expand internationally must pay close attention to interest rate conditions in both its home country and the target country. Now, let's move to exchange rates. An exchange rate tells us how much one currency is worth compared to another currency. For example, if a company from one country buys materials from another country, it may need to pay in a different currency. Exchange rates affect the cost of imports, the price of exports, and the profits of international businesses. If a country's currency becomes stronger, its imports may become cheaper, but its exports may become more expensive for foreign buyers. If a country's currency becomes weaker, its exports may become cheaper and more attractive abroad, but imported materials may become more expensive. This is why exchange rates are extremely important in global business. Let's use a simple example. Imagine a company sells a product internationally. If the company earns revenue in a foreign currency but pays its costs in its home currency, changes in exchange rates can affect profits. Suppose the foreign currency becomes weaker. When the company converts that money back into its home currency, it may receive less than expected. On the other hand, if the foreign currency becomes stronger, the company may receive more. This uncertainty is called currency risk. Currency risk is the possibility that changes in exchange rates will negatively affect a company's costs, revenues, or profits. Currency risk affects many types of companies. Exporters face risk because the value of foreign payments can change before they receive the money. Importers face risk because imported goods may become more expensive if their currency weakens. Multinational companies face risk because they earn and spend money in many currencies. Even students and travelers experience currency risk when exchange rates change before they travel or pay international fees. For businesses, currency risk can make planning difficult. A company may think a project will be profitable, but if exchange rates move in the wrong direction, profits can fall. Companies cannot control exchange rates, but they can manage currency risk. One method is pricing strategy. A company may adjust prices when exchange rates change. Another method is using contracts that reduce uncertainty, such as forward contracts, which allow a business to lock in an exchange rate for a future transaction. Companies may also diversify suppliers and markets so they are not too dependent on one currency. Larger companies may have financial teams that monitor currency movements every day. The main point is this: in global business, exchange rates are not just numbers on a screen. They can directly affect business success. Inflation, interest rates, and growth are closely connected. When inflation rises too quickly, central banks may raise interest rates to slow down spending and reduce price pressure. Higher interest rates can help control inflation, but they may also slow economic growth because borrowing becomes more expensive. On the other hand, when economic growth is weak, central banks may lower interest rates to encourage borrowing, investment, and spending. This relationship creates important effects for global businesses. A company must understand whether a market is growing because of strong demand or whether growth is slowing because of high inflation and high interest rates. Central banks play an important role in the economy. They influence interest rates and help manage inflation and financial stability. When central banks change interest rates, global businesses pay attention. Higher interest rates may attract foreign investors because they can earn higher returns, but they may also make loans more expensive for companies and consumers. Lower interest rates may encourage investment and spending, but they can also create inflation pressure if demand rises too quickly. For global businesses, central bank policy can affect investment decisions, exchange rates, consumer spending, and financial risk. So, how do companies use economic information? They use it to make strategic decisions. If a country has strong growth, stable inflation, low unemployment, and a growing middle class, a company may decide to enter that market. If a country has high inflation, unstable currency, and weak demand, the company may delay expansion or choose a lower risk strategy. Economic conditions also affect pricing. In high inflation markets, companies may need to adjust prices more often. In markets with weak income growth, companies may offer smaller package sizes, lower cost versions, or flexible payment options. Good global managers do not ignore economic conditions. They use economic analysis to reduce risk and find opportunity. Now let's discuss economic integration. Economic integration happens when countries reduce barriers and increase cooperation in trade, investment, labor movement, or economic policy. The goal is usually to make business easier between member countries. Economic integration can take different forms. A free trade area reduces tariffs among member countries. A customs union adds a common external tariff for non-members. A common market allows freer movement of goods, services, capital, and sometimes labor. An economic union may coordinate even more policies, such as common regulations or a shared currency. For businesses, integration can create larger markets and lower trade barriers. Regional blocs are groups of countries that cooperate economically. Examples include the European Union, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, ASEAN in Southeast Asia, and other regional trade arrangements. These blocs can influence global business by changing the rules of trade and investment. For example, if a company produces goods inside a regional bloc, it may gain easier access to other member countries. This can affect where companies build factories, choose suppliers, and distribute products. Regional blocs are important because they create both opportunities and challenges for companies operating internationally. Economic integration can bring several benefits. First, it can reduce tariffs and make trade cheaper. Second, it can increase market size by allowing companies to sell more easily across member countries. Third, it can attract foreign investment because companies may want access to the larger regional market. Fourth, it can encourage competition, innovation, and efficiency. For example, a company may choose to build a factory in one member country because it can then export more easily to other countries in the bloc. In this way, regional integration can shape supply chains, market entry strategies, and investment decisions. However, economic integration also creates challenges. Companies outside a regional bloc may face disadvantages if they must pay higher tariffs or follow stricter rules. Businesses inside the bloc may face stronger competition from companies in neighboring member countries. There may also be complex regulations, standards, and political disagreements among member countries. For small businesses, entering a larger regional market can be exciting, but also difficult because they must compete with more firms. So, economic integration does not automatically guarantee success. Companies still need careful research, adaptation, and strategy. Let's bring these ideas together with a simple example. Imagine an electric vehicle battery company wants to expand into a new region. Before making a decision, the company studies GDP growth to see whether the market is expanding. It studies inflation and interest rates to understand costs and consumer demand. It looks at exchange rates to estimate currency risk. It examines unemployment and income levels to understand the labor market and purchasing power. Finally, it checks whether the country is part of a regional bloc that gives easier access to nearby markets. This example shows how economic factors work together. A smart company does not look at only one number. It studies the whole economic environment. Remember, you can use a simple framework when analyzing any country or market. Ask 5 questions. First, is the economy growing? Second, are prices stable or is inflation high? Third, are interest rates encouraging or discouraging investment? Fourth, is the currency stable or risky? Fifth, is the country connected to a regional trade bloc? These 5 questions can help you understand whether a market may be attractive or risky for international business. This framework is useful not only for exams, but also for real business analysis. Let's review the key points from today's lesson. First, macroeconomic indicators help businesses understand the overall condition of a market. Second, GDP growth, unemployment, inflation, interest rates, and exchange rates can strongly affect business decisions. Third, exchange rates create currency risk, especially for exporters, importers, and multinational companies. Fourth, inflation, interest rates, and growth are connected through business costs, consumer spending, and central bank policy. Fifth, economic integration and regional blocs can create larger markets, lower trade barriers, and new opportunities, but they can also increase competition and complexity. Understanding these economic factors helps global businesses make smarter decisions. Thank you very much for joining me in Lesson 2 on economic factors influencing global markets. In this lesson, we learned that global business is strongly influenced by economic conditions. Companies must study growth, inflation, interest rates, exchange rates, and regional integration before making international decisions. Before we finish this video lesson, stay with me for a quiz challenge in the next section to test your understanding of today's lesson. Question number 1. Which macroeconomic indicator measures the total value of goods and services produced in a country? A. Inflation rate, B. GDP, C. Exchange rate, D. Unemployment rate. Here's your hint. Think about the indicator used to measure the overall production of an economy. If you said GDP, you are absolutely correct. GDP measures the total value of goods and services produced in a country. GDP growth helps businesses understand whether a market is expanding or slowing down. Question number 2. What is currency risk? A. The possibility that a company will run out of products. B. The possibility that interest rates will always remain low. C. The possibility that exchange rate changes will affect costs, revenue, or profit. D. The possibility that a country will join a regional trade bloc. Here's your hint. Think about what can happen when a company earns or spends money in different currencies. The correct answer is C. Currency risk occurs because exchange rates can rise or fall. These changes may increase or decrease a company's costs, revenue, and final profit. Moving on to question number 3. Which level of economic integration allows freer movement of goods, services, capital, and labor among member countries? A. Free trade area. B. Customs union. C. Common market. D. Independent market. Here's your hint. This level goes beyond reducing tariffs and allows several economic resources to move more freely. The correct answer is C. Common market. A common market allows freer movement of goods, services, capital, and labor among member countries. It represents a deeper level of economic integration than a free trade area or customs union. Moving on to fill in the blank questions. Question number 4. The what rate shows the percentage of people who are looking for work but do not have jobs. Here's your hint. I want you to think about the economic indicator connected to jobs and the labor market. If you said unemployment, you are absolutely correct. The unemployment rate measures the percentage of people seeking work who do not currently have jobs. High unemployment may reduce income and consumer demand. Question number 5. A. What? Contract allows a business to lock in an exchange rate for a future transaction. Here's your hint. This type of agreement helps a company reduce uncertainty about future currency values. If you said forward, you are absolutely correct. A forward contract allows a business to agree on an exchange rate in advance. This can help reduce the risk created by future exchange rate changes. Question number 6. When countries reduce trade barriers and increase economic cooperation, this process is called economic. What? Here's your hint. Think about countries joining together to make trade and investment easier. The correct answer is integration. Economic integration occurs when countries reduce barriers and cooperate more closely in trade, investment, labor movement, or economic policy. Moving on to short answer questions. Question number 7. How can inflation affect consumers and businesses? Here's your hint. Think about purchasing power, product prices, and business operating costs. Here's a sample answer. Inflation causes the general level of prices to rise. Consumers lose purchasing power because the same amount of money buys fewer goods and services. Businesses may also face higher costs for materials, wages, transportation, and energy. Question number 8. How can high interest rates influence business expansion? Here's your hint. Think about the cost of borrowing money for factories, equipment, stores, and other investments. Here's a sample answer. High interest rates make borrowing more expensive. As a result, businesses may delay opening new stores, building factories, purchasing equipment, or investing in new projects. This can slow business expansion and economic growth. Question number 9. Explain one benefit and one challenge of economic integration for businesses. And here's your hint. For the benefit, think about tariffs, market size, or supply chains. For the challenge, think about competition, regulations, or barriers facing firms outside the regional bloc. Here's a sample answer. One benefit of economic integration is that lower tariffs can make trade cheaper and give businesses access to a larger market. One challenge is that companies may face stronger competition or more complex regional regulations. Great job! You made it to the end of today's lesson on economics factors influencing global markets and completed the quiz challenge. Thanks for watching today's lesson. Until next time, take care.